Thanks so much for being here today. My name is Lynn Schofield Clark, and I am a professor and chair here at the University of Denver in the Department of Media, Film, and Journalism Studies, and also have the privilege of being the director of the Estlow International Center for Journalism and New Media. And I'm really thrilled to be introducing you to this day that's going to start off with the Estlow lecture, and then we'll also continue to have a Migrahack, or a Migrahack, you can pronounce it either way. I think universities are at their best when they can be catalysts for the kinds of conversations that we need to have in terms of being a civic environment. And that's what today is about. We are talking a lot at our Colorado universities and at University of Denver here about collective impact. Collective impact is when you have a group of people from different sectors of society who come together to form community and have a common agenda to address a specific and complicated social problem. The problem that we're looking at today, through structured collaboration, is the issue of immigration and how people are experiencing it in their everyday lives. What we're here to do is to enrich the conversation about immigration in Colorado. And we are interested in why and how people in Colorado are experiencing these policies of immigration in their day-to-day lives. How are they affected by the policies? What are these lived experiences? And because we are an information-based university, we are interested in how we can bring data and information to bear on creating better informed decisions. So I'm a professor of journalism, and in my work I do studies of young people who are newcomers to the United States and who are also newcomers to news and to politics. And we know some things about research. Research has shown about young people and news and politics. We know that young people, and I'm talking now about people who are under 35, so college students as well as those who are younger than me. Anybody younger than you is a young person. That's usually how it goes. Young people under the age of 35 have said that what's important to them is news that is useful, that is informed by facts, and that inspires them to provide a path toward action. So that's something that's the basis of a Reuters study. It's something that I found as well in my mostly interview-based research that I've done with young people. And it's not just young people, because we know that the over 65 crowd is actually the group that was most likely to share disinformation or fake news in the context of the last election. So we know we all have a need for important sources of information. And what we're trying to do here today is to provide a way that we can share information and can be part of creating information in new ways as well, to invite other people who maybe haven't been part of the conversation on immigration or who want to be a part of a conversation to have some ways in. We feel like that's something that a university can do, and also something that journalists and groups of people from other elements of society can also be a part of. So as I get started, I wanted to say a few words of thanks. And that first I want to thank Ed Estlow, who is not here today, but who is the person for whom the lecture that you'll be hearing is named for. He was an inspiration to many of us in Colorado journalism and to me. And I also want to thank his daughter-in-laws who are here, his daughters and sons-in-law who are here today with us, and his grandchildren, who shared his commitment to the importance of both information and personal integrity in the ongoing work of democracy. I also want to thank my co-organizer, Lisa Martinez, who's in the back there. You'll be hearing from her later today, but her expertise informed this day's event, and her leadership at DU in the area of migration and immigration has been remarkable, as you'll see later this morning. And I'd like to thank Darrigan Silver, who is the director of the Madden Center, who helped to secure the funding that got all of this started. And Nancy Watzman, who is our director of Colorado Media Project, who has worked tirelessly to contribute to the Colorado journalism ecosystem and has recruited the involvement of many professional journalists who will be here today. And I want to thank Sandra Fish, who you'll also be hearing from later, who's also with the Colorado Media Project, whose high-quality work in data journalism has been an inspiration and whose work in gathering data sets is unparalleled for us today. And I'd like to thank Celeste Bustamante, who is the organizer of the Arizona Migrahack, who has been our consultant based on her work leading that event, and she will also talk with us about what will happen following about 10 o'clock this morning for the Migrahack. And I'd also like to thank Adan Medrano, who is one of my longtime friends and inspirations, who has been a filmmaker himself and who will share his gifts as a chef with us tomorrow afternoon from 5 to 7 at the closing reception when we're celebrating all of the productions that have come out of this two-day event. There are many members of the planning team who have also contributed from the university here as well as other universities. We have people on live stream today from Colorado State University, from Colorado College, Metro State, CU Boulder, CU Denver, and others who will be participating. So welcome to all of you who are following along with us online, and please feel free to use the Twitter hashtag to participate in the conversation. I also want to thank Ethan Crawford, who is the one who is responsible for the live streaming and the media, but I want to give a special thanks and shout out to Emily Schwartz, who many of you may recognize her name because she is the one this event would not be possible without her expertise in planning, and she has really been the one behind the scenes pulling all of this together. So thank you very much, Emily. This is an experimental day to try to pull together a group of people who come from various places, but who share an interest and who want to do something in the format of an unconference is something that we hope that we can do as a university that can try to create space that's going to bring about what I talked about before, which is collective impact. And we really do hope that what happens in these next couple of days is able to inform conversations, is able to bring new people into conversations, is able to provide ways of us to find new avenues for understanding a complex issue in our society. So thank you all very much for being here. And now it's my pleasure to introduce you to our Vice Provost for Faculty Affairs, Kate Willink.
Good morning, buenos dias, welcome, bienvenido a todos. On behalf of the University of Denver, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the first statewide Colorado Migrahack and to the 27th Estlow lecture to get the Migrahack started. We are delighted you are here. The Migrahack is a two-day event that brings together journalists, data scientists, designers, students, faculty, and staff and members of the community, recognizing that many people in these groups have expertise and lived experience with immigration. This is an opportunity for all of us to learn from and with each other, drawing on the rich information, sources, and creating new means of communicating what we learn. It is my hope, no matter your background, your resume, or your current job title, that you push beyond the limits of what you think storytelling is and can be, to bring to light important issues and find new ways to speak truth, to move people, and to catalyze transformation. This is the time and place to listen carefully to each other and to share your ideas, even those that seem out of the box and unconventional. I hope you make new connections, relationships, and create networks that last long past this event. This Migrahack is open to all modes of storytelling, even those that we might not always think of, like songs and testimonios. Anything that uses evidence and data to help stories increase understanding about immigration. As part of the University of Denver Grand Challenge series, this event creates a space for experiential and interdisciplinary learning that is meant to inform our community and, in turn, to help us make the best decisions possible together in a democratic society. So thank you for being here and for being part of this important event. I look forward to seeing what you all discover together and what you can create. Now please please join me in welcoming Nancy Watsman. Thanks so much.
Oops. Hello, everybody. I'm Nancy Watsman. I'm director of Colorado Media Project, and so happy this day is here. And thanks to all the people that Lynn thanked, and especially to Lynn, for putting together this wonderful program. So the Colorado Media Project was founded in 2018. It was inspired by some unfortunate events, which are well known, I think, probably to many here, about severe cutbacks at the Denver Post. But this was really part of a long story, a long trajectory. The Rocky Mountain News closed its doors a decade before. And it really kind of sparked this conversation in the community about what do we do and what happens when we lose local news. It's become obvious in this time of polarization that and extreme viewpoints that local news really plays an important part in building trust. You know, it's the same kind of thing where you might not trust Congress, but you trust your member of Congress. And local news folks, because they live in our community and they report on things, they might be members of our community, the trust just comes more naturally. And so community leaders came together to decide to help think about how can we make sure that we have local news in the future and support the local news ecosystem in Colorado. Oh, that's me. You already know who I am. So the Colorado Media Project in 2019, when I joined, was invigorated with new investment from Gates Family Foundation. We now enjoy investment from Democracy Fund, several other local funders, Bohemian, Ethics and Excellence in Journalism Foundation, and so on, because everybody is kind of coming around together to understand that this is a problem that we need to solve together. And Colorado Media Project is working by, we call it the 3 Cs, capacity, collaboration, and community. I think the Migrahack, the Colorado Migrahack, represents all 3. We're excited to gather together and bring community together to help inform journalism. We're hoping to inspire collaborations in these 2 days and beyond. And we're helping to build capacity by connecting journalists to experts in data analysis and web developers and so on, where they may not have access to those kinds of folks in their newsroom. So why do we need stories about immigration and to deepen stories? Well, a lot of our news people, this is a photograph from Denverite, which is now part of CPR, as a homegrown, digital startup that really tells stories from our community. And this is a story about dreamers that appeared in what happens when parents of dreamers age and the complicated questions with our healthcare and how it's affected by proposed legislation. So a great example of deep storytelling around an important issue. 1 out of 10 of us in Colorado is an immigrant. We need to know who these people. I'm the granddaughter of immigrants. Many people here may be immigrants. These are people in our community we need to understand better and have deep storytelling. But immigration, as we know, especially nationally, is a very, very polarizing issue. And there's a lot of misunderstood ideas and thoughts around immigration, and that's why we need this kind of reporting. And as Lynn mentioned, we have Sandra Fish, who pulled together a lot of data sets for these 2 days, and we really believe that our reporting will be deepened and made better if we base it on data and all the many resources available. So here's some other headlines from other reporting around immigration, which we hope to inspire more of and give resources for. So I just urge everyone to stay involved. We just think this is a really important issue that's not going away. This is our website. Please feel free to check us out there and join us and subscribe to our newsletter and stay in touch about activities like this in the future.
I'm glad to introduce you, Lisa Rosenberg, who is here. Some of you have read that we are also doing a workshop as part of today, and so I'm going to let her talk a little bit about what that's going to be.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Yes, I'm Lisa Rosenberg. I'm the Executive Director of Open the Government. We are an organization based in Washington, D.C. As our name would suggest, we are all about transparency in government. So we do a lot of advocacy and also a lot of independent research around open government. And one of our main tools that we want to strengthen, improve, and use is the Freedom of Information Act, both on the federal and also on the local level, local Freedom of Information Acts. And we're thrilled to be at Migrahack. And we hope that many of you will be able to join our workshop that I believe is at 10:30 today, where we will be having one of our experts from Open the Government, who's also here, working with you to teach you, tell you, help you use the Freedom of Information Act to get the kind of information that could be useful to tell these stories, again, about immigration. We are obsessed with FOIA, and we really think that there's a potential there that is untapped, and we want to share that with as many people as we can and as often as we can. So, I mean, Pulitzer Prize-winning stories stem from FOIA requests, and policy changes come as a result of information found through FOIA. But you don't have to be a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist to use FOIA. And in fact, you can be an average, regular person. And one of my favorite FOIA stories, and the reason I hope some of you will join us at this workshop is so that you can do this too, is there's an individual out there, and a guy by the name of Russ Kitt. And some of you may remember there was a time when the Pentagon refused to let the flag-draped coffins, refused to allow pictures of the flag-draped coffins, coming back from war zones. And reporters were asking for this, and they wanted the information, and what's going on, and they're asking. This guy, Russ Kitt, who has used FOIA before, said, wait, if they're banning photos, that must mean there are photos. I'm going to do a FOIA for the photos. And he got them. He got hundreds of photos. He put them online, didn't think much of it. The way he tells the story, he went to bed, woke up the next morning, it was headline news. He was being interviewed on like CNN and MSNBC. And obviously also those photos, contributed to sort of the collective understanding of what is going on, what was happening to our soldiers and our military when they went off to war and came back in coffins. So we thought that, I just love that story because it's just a guy who said, wait, the reporters didn't think to FOIA for the photos, but some, individual really did. And we too at Open the Government, again, not Pulitzer Prize-winning journalists, but we've had some FOIA successes that we think really can impact policy too, or have impacted policy. We asked, as did a lot of other reporters, I suppose too, for the signed documents from the Department of Homeland Security around the zero tolerance policy around immigration. And we got the signed document that, that the leaders were all saying didn't exist. We don't have a zero tolerance policy, and we're not about family separation. We got the document that said, here's the zero tolerance policy, and here's the best way to enforce it. It's separating families at the border, signed by Secretary Nielsen. So, I mean, that, again, I think is really impactful, holding the government to account, getting truth, speaking truth to power, basically. We did another FOIA, local FOIA, around the police department in Washington, D.C., asking for arrest records. We found unequivocally, what I think people always assumed, but unequivocal, massive racial disparities in arrests. So, and no matter which way you cut the data, there were massive, massive disparities. So now we have that information, and activists and leaders can go to the Metropolitan Police Department in D.C. and say, fix this, do something about this. So it can be so powerful. So that's why we're here today, and we want to share this with you. What our plan is to work with you to brainstorm the type of information that matters to you around immigration. It could be around what's going on here in Colorado, it could be nationally, and then help you create the FOIAs. So hopefully by the end of today, we will have created a FOIA to request the kind of information, or multiple FOIAs, to request the kind of information that will be impactful to you. We are really fortunate, I'm really fortunate to have Freddie Martinez, our FOIA expert at Open the Government here, he's over in the corner, to do the training. He's been doing FOIA work for at least 5 years. He's had a lot of luck finding out information, local information about the Chicago Police Department when he was there in Chicago, and discovered a warrantless surveillance program, and then got the laws changed, so there's now some police accountability around those types of programs. So it can matter, and it can change, and it can make a difference, and that's why I really hope that many of you will be able to join us again at 10:30 and help you create the FOIAs that will impact your work and your understanding of what's going on in immigration. So thank you so much.
Well, good morning. So my name is Curtis Esquivel, and I'm the Associate Director of the Latino Leadership Institute, which is an institute based here at the University of Denver. We work actually in the community. We work mostly with adult professionals who are already successful leaders in Colorado and elevate them and get them on that path to executive leadership. And so I have the privilege of running a program where we have fellows that come from all parts of our state, across sectors and industries, and really guiding them, coaching them, providing them training to lead. As you all know, Colorado is a case study for a lot of things. We are a growing state by population, though, as we'll talk about today, there's a lot of challenges in Colorado and opportunities around where we are today. Demographically, we are shifting dramatically. By 2030, more than 30% of Coloradans will be Latino. By 2050, more than 40%. But just because you have numbers doesn't mean you have power or influence, and that's really the mission of our organization. In addition, we put a lot of community symposiums on campus together. We do leadership and inclusion trainings for organizations to prepare for the workforce of tomorrow. That said, I'm here today on a personal level as well, as I get to introduce my longtime friend, and I'm also a recovering journalist, which there's probably a few of us in the room, but there is so much power in the work of journalism today, and so I'm really inspired to see so many students here as well, to encourage you to keep on your path. And, I'm agnostic a lot of times to mediums today because I feel like the skill sets that so many young people are coming out of school with are so vital. So it's really great to be here. I get to do a lot of introductions, though this one is one of my favorite of all time, to introduce my friend of nearly 20 years, Cindy Carcamo, although I don't think we've been in the same room together for more than 15 years. So it's great to see her today. Cindy covers immigration issues for the Los Angeles Times. Previously, she was Arizona bureau chief and a national correspondent for the Times, focusing on border and immigration issues in the Southwest. Cindy's a Southern California native. She grew up in a predominantly Jewish neighborhood in the San Fernando Valley in the city of Chatsworth. She readily admits to never having once been to a quinceañera growing up, but having attended piles of bar and bat mitzvahs. Too many to count, actually. That said, Cindy's journey and experience with immigration is also very personal, and in layers of ways, it's an interwoven narrative that is both Latino and American. Her parents and older sister immigrated to the U.S. from Guatemala. For a time, Cindy, an American-born citizen, lived in a mixed-status family, which she's going to talk about. The combined complexity yet everyday normalcy of her family's story, which is shared by hundreds of thousands of Americans today, has informed her reporting and storytelling of the immigrant experience. In her nearly 20-year professional career, Cindy has reported from Mexico, Central America, and South America, and she's received numerous awards for her enterprising work. Most recently, she won the Ruben Salazar Excellence in Journalism Award for her story about Gaspar Marcos, an unaccompanied Guatemalan teenager who struggles to navigate American life. In 2017, the Los Angeles Press Club honored her with an award for Best Immigration Reporting. She holds a journalism degree from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, where she sits on the advisory board for her alma mater's journalism department with another mutual friend of ours. Cindy lives in Santa Ana, California with her husband and 4-year-old daughter, Cora, who recently traveled with mom while on assignment in Guatemala. And actually, Cindy's written about this. She wrote a great story about her daughter's experience in her...
Attention patrons, this is a security alarm, not a fire alarm. You do not have to evacuate the building at this time. We are sorry for this inconvenience.
That was not on the script. So Cindy lives in Santa Ana with her 4-year-old daughter, Cora, and her husband. Her husband is also a recovering journalist. But really, we'll share her story of her daughter's experience really in her parents' hometown. Cindy's also a class of 1999 alumna of the CHIPS Quinn Scholars Program, which is the Freedom Forum's long-standing initiative to diversify America's newsrooms. I was also a member of that class, and that's how we met more than 20 years ago. And though I'm no longer a journalist today, I feel a sense of pride in seeing Cindy's byline, because when I see her name, I know she leads with credibility, with curiosity, and with authenticity, both as a Latina and a journalist. So it is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Cindy Carcamo. Okay,
the button.
got it.
Thank you so much. You're so awesome. Can you guys hear me okay? All right. Thank you so much. Wow, thank you so much, Curtis. Thank you to the Estlow International Center for Journalism and New Media at the University of Denver for allowing me to deliver the 2019-2020 Estlow Center Anvil of Freedom Lecture, kicking off the first Colorado Migrahack. I have the amazing privilege to cover immigration for more than a decade. My first opportunity to cover border stories was as an intern at the El Paso Times as a CHIPS Quinn Scholar. And Curtis already mentioned this, but we were both CHIPS Quinn Scholars together. And this program launched my career in journalism. I'm forever grateful to the Freedom Forum for that. This was the summer of 1999, and the El Paso Times gave me the incredible opportunity to cover Southwest border issues, including immigration. You see, I'd wanted to write about immigration stories ever since I was a young teen growing up in the suburbs of Los Angeles in the mid-1990s. I just joined the high school newspaper and had fallen in love with journalism. I knew I wanted to be a journalist. I remember watching the nightly news on TV with my family and noticing that the immigration news I saw did not reflect my reality of growing up in an immigrant household. There was a serious disconnect. So when I saw these news reports, I knew I wanted to tell a fuller, more nuanced story about the immigrant experience in the United States. My parents immigrated to the U.S. from Guatemala in the 1970s. At one point, they were in the country without legal status. They eventually received U.S. residency in the early 1980s, and now are U.S. citizens and actually staunch Republicans. This is just a sliver of my family's complicated immigration story, and I'll get to more of that later. Let's jump now to President Trump's hard stance on immigration enforcement. Frankly, this was a long time coming. This moment in time did not happen in a vacuum. As journalists, we are obligated to connect the dots. A bit after President Ronald Reagan's 1986 amnesty, several laws passed that expanded the list of deportable offenses. A significant crackdown came under Bill Clinton's Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act of 1996. The law eliminated due process from the overwhelming majority of removal cases. It mandated detention for broad swaths of those facing deportation. It created new immigration-related crimes. And also, it led to the creation of the 287G program, which essentially deputized state and local law enforcement as immigration agents. Those laws, and those passed under subsequent administrations, such as Bush and Obama, built much of the legal and operational infrastructure that underlies the Trump administration's plan to remove immigrants from this country. Immigrants who are here illegally and legally. In June, the president tweeted, "Next week, ICE will begin the process of removing the millions of illegal aliens who have illicitly found their way into the United States. They will be removed as fast as they come in." Now, let's go beyond the rhetoric. Let's get to the numbers. After all, we're here to kick off Migrahack. So despite the rhetoric, overall removal numbers during Trump's first 2 years in office pale in comparison with those of the previous Obama administration. The Trump administration is on track to remove only about 8% more people in fiscal year 2019 than President Obama's last year in office. And that's according to Immigration and Customs Enforcement data. And during the height of deportations under Obama in 2012, immigration officials removed about 409,000 people. By comparison, peak removals under Trump came last year at about 256,000. When reports surfaced earlier this summer, of nationwide raids at the behest of the Trump administration, we honed in on the number of targeted apprehensions, an estimated 2,000. Again, we looked at the numbers. Currently, there are about 1 million immigrants with final removal orders. If you do the math, this is a bit more than 0.2% of those facing deportation. It's horrible for those detained, but that's a statistical drop in the bucket. Robert Suro, a longtime immigration expert and professor at the University of Southern California, put it into context. It's purely psychological, he said. This is yet one more example of how the Trump administration is trying to use fear as an instrument of immigration control. It generates a lot of fear, but not a lot of control. This has nothing to do with actual enforcement. The frenzy leading up to it sends a powerful message, however, to two groups. That's what Suro said. One audience is supposed to feel like something is happening, that's his base, and the other is supposed to be scared to death. Data and facts matter more than ever. It especially matters when reporting on emotionally charged issues such as immigration. Last year, many Americans panicked when they saw images of thousands of people traveling in large groups from Central America to Mexico, heading north to the United States. They were described as caravans. Looking at these images, many believed there was a deepening crisis, believing that these people would somehow storm our southern borders and illegally enter our nation. President Trump seized on the moment, calling it an assault on the southern U.S. border. The administration characterized the border as out of control, but was it really? Again, let's look at the numbers. The U.S. government gauges trends in illegal immigration by looking at the number of people who are apprehended each year trying to cross the southwest border. And that figure steadily climbed from the 1970s through the 1990s, peaking at 1.64 million in fiscal year 2000. We have a few days left to close the fiscal year. Still, so far, there has been an estimated 800,000 apprehensions. And at the time of the caravans, it was less than half, about 390,000. That's a far cry from the peak of 1.64 million. For those who are worried about an invasion, they missed it. It happened years ago. Don't get me wrong, there is a crisis happening along the southern border, but not about illegal immigration. It's about legal immigration, specifically asylum seekers. In reality, a good portion of the people who are counted in the apprehension numbers are not trying to sneak into the U.S. Many of them have given themselves up to Border Patrol agents between U.S. ports of entry along the southern border. They're asking for asylum, which they are legally entitled to do under international and U.S. laws. Part of the crisis is that the Trump administration wants to detain most of them, and the infrastructure we currently have in place cannot detain them all. The holding facilities currently in place were created years ago when the demographics of those traveling north were different. Most were adults and men, primarily from Mexico, lured to the U.S. for economic reasons, jobs. Now it's largely families, mothers and young children from Central America, forced to flee their homes due to violence. And these facilities are not equipped to hold such a vulnerable population. Instead of addressing the issue of holding facilities, the Trump administration implemented a zero-tolerance policy, which we alluded to earlier, in the spring of 2018, to criminally prosecute every adult who entered the country without inspection. And so this included people who entered in between U.S. ports of entry and gave themselves up to Border Patrol agents, asking for asylum. The policy resulted in immigration officials separating migrant children from their parents. This triggered, as you know, widespread outrage, and in June of last year, the government scrapped the policy. Still, the government had no plan on how to reunite children with these parents, and many adults were deported to Central America without their children. An estimated 400 children from toddlers to teens were left behind in U.S. detention facilities after their parents were deported to the Northern Triangle. On the ground, I followed a group of attorneys in the highlands of Guatemala, searching remote villages for parents deported from the U.S. without their children. In most cases, the attorneys had a name as their only clue. They didn't have telephone numbers or exact addresses. I followed them as they traveled twisted trails and cabs and minivans and old buses to mountain hamlets where most people don't even speak Spanish. They speak a Mayan tongue. I ended the story with Nuria Lanuza, a mother still waiting for her 12-year-old son, Eric. The boy had been detained in Chicago for 4 months, and she was devastated and desperate. About a week after the story ran, I was putting my 4-year-old daughter, Cora, to bed when I got a call from Nuria. She had gotten word that the government would be returning her son, and she asked me if I could travel back to Guatemala to document the reunification. I had to go. Just one problem. I'd be gone for a week. The same week, my husband would be out of town. Who would watch her 4-year-old daughter? Aside from school, I had no childcare. Who would watch her overnight? The grandparents were unavailable, so I took her with me on assignment. I was lucky enough to have friends in Guatemala City who watched her while I was out reporting. And there's so much more to this story, but that's for another time. Essentially, she had a great time. I wrote a separate personal story about it in our travel section. Back in Guatemala with Eric and Nuria, it was supposed to be a happy mother and child back together story, right? It sort of was, but right away, Nuria noticed a change in her son. He's not the same boy, she told me. Nuria learned that while in detention in Chicago, Eric had been put on an antipsychotic drug called Risperidone, a powerful medication used to treat bipolar disorders and schizophrenia. It's also used to control extreme emotions, thoughts, and behavior. Nuria told me she had never agreed for him to be given those drugs. Thanks to documents obtained by a team of amazing female reporters at ProPublica, Illinois, I was able to see that Eric was one of several children who had been taken to a facility that serves youth who need specialized mental health services. While in custody, records show that Eric struggled to adjust, understandably. He acted out and became aggressive with staff and other children. At one point, he became so combative that he had to be physically restrained for more than 2 hours, according to medical records. In an interview with me, he said he was given medicine so he wouldn't make a fuss. By the time I finished reporting, it was really late. I rushed back to my friend's home in Guatemala City to put my daughter to bed after giving her a bath. And my editors wanted the story early the next morning. So I put her down at 9 p.m., and I wrote into the night. I think I went to bed like around 3 in the morning. But even though Trump's zero tolerance policy stopped, it doesn't mean family separations have ended. Attorneys and other observers say the government continues to take children from their asylum-seeking parents by abusing a long-standing policy designed to protect children. Much of this is happening at U.S. ports of entry. The government can take custody when the child is deemed to be in danger or an adult cannot prove if he or she is related to the child. But lawyers say in court filings that in some cases immigration officials have been falsely making these determinations. But even with the threat of taking away their children, it's sometimes not enough to deter people from giving themselves up at ports of entry to ask for asylum. For many, the violence they face back in their homelands in Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador supersede the tribulations especially engineered for them by the U.S. government. In June 2018, as word spread of the government stripping children away from immigrants, Central American mothers in temporary shelters in Tijuana prepared themselves and their children for possible deportation. Carmen, a mother from El Salvador, who said she was fleeing the 18th Street gang in her neighborhood in El Salvador, told her 10-year-old son and 6-year-old daughter the following. "Listen closely," she told them. The day we get to the border, we are going to ask for asylum in the United States. That's when an official might come to get you. If that official takes you by the hand and you notice I'm not walking behind you, don't worry. They're going to take you to a place where there are other children. Where will you be, Mommy? Her son asked. I don't know. But you have to be patient because we will see each other again, she assured him. We will be together again. They will take good care of you there. It won't be forever. In a separate shelter, Dalila, a Guatemalan mother fleeing domestic violence, stopped breastfeeding her baby girl, Bernadette. She had decided it was a sensible thing to do in case the U.S. government took custody of her baby. Bernadette wailed for 3 days and clawed at her mother's breast before she took the formula. Now, it's important to take a step back. We have to keep in mind that family separations have happened for quite some time. Admittedly, it hasn't been at this scale or as intentional, But prior administrations, both Democrat and Republican, have separated immigrant families in a variety of ways for decades. For instance, targeted enforcement operations by Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents intensified under the Obama administration and separated many fathers and mothers, deporting them and taking them away from their children. These types of operations have been around since the mid-1990s. Sometimes it's not government officials coming to your door and taking a parent away. For many, it's U.S. foreign policies in Central America dating back to the early 1900s that created the circumstances which propel people north. For years, parents from Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras have had to make hard decisions with long-lasting implications. Just as Dalila and Carmen from earlier, my own mother had to make similar calculations on what was best for her child before heading north. My older sister was a baby when my parents migrated to the United States. My parents, mostly my mother, made the difficult decision to leave my sister behind with her mother, our grandmother. She thought it would be best for everyone, including my sister. The thinking was that they would first work hard, get settled, and eventually bring my sister to live with them in Los Angeles. But that decision came at a heavy price. By the time my parents got their green cards in the early 1980s and were able to legally bring my sister to the United States, my grandmother wasn't ready to let go. She understandably grew very attached to her. My sister would have to wait until she was 9 years old to join our family. I was 4 at the time. The separation had long-lasting repercussions for our family. In many ways, my sister is a success story. She's a gastroenterologist and the head of internal medicine for a major Bay Area hospital in California. Still, to this day, she struggles with the trauma of having been left behind. The separation negatively impacted her relationship with my parents. She still copes with abandonment issues. She has a son, he's 9, the same age she was when she was ripped away from her grandmother in Guatemala to join her family in the U.S. Now I recognize my sister's privilege. She has come to the U.S. on a plane to reunite with my parents who had gained legal status under circumstances that no longer exist. My sister didn't have to endure the trauma of treacherous clandestine trip like many other children. She wasn't forcibly taken away from my parents' arms by strangers. The separation came as a result of a decision my parents made in the wake of a devastating earthquake, faltering Guatemala economy, and burgeoning bloody civil war in the 1980s, just exacerbated by U.S. foreign policy. I remember attending my parents' and sisters' U.S. citizenship ceremony in the 1980s. It was a big deal, and my parents were quick to register to vote. They registered Republican for a variety of reasons. One included being huge fans of President Ronald Reagan. After all, he had granted amnesty to millions who were in the country without legal status. He was a Republican. Some may say that my family history, growing up in an immigrant household, makes me biased. It does not. Any journalist who tells you their objective is lying. We are human beings, we're not robots. We all carry baggage and experiences, of course. I bring my experiences to my reporting. I also bring my journalistic training to write fair stories that balance toward truth based on facts. My background helps inform me and has prepared me for this moment in time, for the journalism I produce today. Growing up in an immigrant household prepared me to understand where some people are literally coming from. I have intimate knowledge of what it's like to grow up in a mixed status family, watching my parents and family members navigate American life. My upbringing helps provide context for the stories I tell. It helps me understand the generation that came afterward, the sons and daughters of immigrants who straddle both worlds like I do. Those who grew up listening to Juan Gabriel with their parents in the car and also listen to the Pixies with their friends. It's these details that makes for good storytelling, and journalists are only going to get it if they go out there and talk with those who are most impacted by immigration policies, immigrants and their families. This is why events such as Migrahack or Migrahack are so important. Anecdotes are fine, but they become a real story when you have supporting data, when you have the numbers to prove a trend or widely shared experience. The marriage of gripping anecdotes and hard data is what elevates storytelling into powerful journalism. Thank you.
going to take some
Yes, yes, I am.
So
Yeah.
thank you so much, Cindy, for that. And I wanted to show you all that we are giving Cindy an award to recognize her contributions to journalism that have helped us all to have better understandings about this issue of immigration and about humanity. So I want to just give you this award.
Thank you.
This is our...
Wow, thank you so much. This is wonderful. Thank you. Wow. It's really heavy, too. It's wonderful.
So
Thank
congratulations and
Thank you
thank
so
you.
much.
And Cindy has some time that she would like to be able to answer your questions. So we're glad to be able to take some questions if we have some questions.
you. Yes, please do.
Hi, Cindy. That was a great, what I thought, very balanced presentation on the problems of immigration. I've got two quick questions. I'm a scientist. I used to be the director of the University of Denver Research Institute, so I like facts and data too.
Great.
When we talk about separating children from their families, we hear, without any facts or data, I don't think, that most of those are because of the fact that the children have been acting as children to non-family immigrants that are just trying to get in. I want to know what the facts and data are about that. And the second thing is just what would be your quick solution to the problem? Because obviously there are a couple billion people in the world that are under violence,
Sure.
starvation, etc. We can't let them all in, and they couldn't get here anyway. I mean, from the Southern Triangle in Mexico, it's very easy. But thank you
sure.
very much. Great.
Oh, thank you. So the first question about, yes, I think it was a Washington Post story where it was about family members or maybe just people using children as a way to get into the United States. Now, I can tell you that in my reporting, and from the attorneys that I've spoken with and the experts, that it's actually not very common and it's pretty rare. It's not to say that it doesn't happen, of course, these things happen, but I can tell you in my reporting, the people that I spoke with, I had yet to find someone where it looked like a sketchy situation. I think what is also happening is also that there's a misunderstanding of what family is. So people, sometimes it's a grandparent or an aunt that's bringing the child, and the mom and dad, or whoever it is in the United States, and so they're escorting the child. And I think that there's a misunderstanding that maybe is not, because that's not really the child's, not sponsor, but that it's not the parent, that there's a misunderstanding that because of that there's some kind of fraudulent thing happening. But I think in Latin America and a lot actually throughout the world, family, a grandmother or an aunt is still considered family. It's just extended family, right? So I think there's some of that happening as well. I can tell you that asylum laws have become very, very strict under this administration. And so it's become almost impossible to win your asylum case. So I think that there are, I guess we have to have a serious conversation as Americans as to who we are going to allow into our country, right? And what it means to be American. And I don't think we've had that conversation. And I think that everyone is it's so polarized. Everyone's so on their side about things and so not ready to budge that I don't know, I don't have a solution. If I had a solution, I wouldn't just be a journalist. I'd probably be, I would be like an academic, I don't know. But I really don't have a solution because the thing about immigration is that it's very nuanced, it's very complicated. Immigration law is way more complicated than tax law even. And it's very misunderstood. And it's a very emotional issue. So I don't have a solution. I really don't, to be quite honest with you. And I don't know if there will be a solution under this administration or the next administration. Sure. Thank you for asking that question.
With your experience with the policy side of things and also seeing the effects in like a very humanistic kind of way, what are the implications of like the use of rhetoric in policy, whether that's like prevention through deterrence in the 1990s or like the administration after that. How important is the way that like government frames the issue of immigration in the way that it's received by like the people?
I think it's very important, and you're seeing it really magnified, amplified with this government. The rhetoric, just as during my lecture, the rhetoric doesn't seem to line up with what's actually happening on the ground, too. One thing I didn't mention, though, was that actually the administration is not really going after illegal immigration. I mean, they say they are, but if you look at the numbers, it doesn't really seem that way. What they're doing is they're saying a lot of things are happening with memos. So it's stuff that people don't even know is really happening that doesn't get as much coverage, unfortunately, where they're, rolling back TPS, or they're making it harder to become a U.S. resident, or making it harder to become a U.S. citizen, actually. So I think that that's something that's overlooked. And I think a lot of it is because of the rhetoric that comes out of the White House. And a lot of the rhetoric, you can't help but notice its racial undertones. I mean, it's become a question of race as well. So I think that, I don't know if I'm answering your question. Am I? Okay, so yeah, no, definitely during this administration, the rhetoric has been really harsh. It has been very harsh. But if you look at Obama, for instance, it was very different. The rhetoric was different, but what was happening on the ground, there was a disconnect, right? You had huge numbers on deportations under the Obama administration. A lot of them were of people who were along the border and entering, but still, I think that's why it's so important to look at data, because you can have all of these great anecdotes, you can think you know what's happening, but you need to look at the data to back it up.
Hi, my name is Beatriz. I am coming from Durango, Colorado. And we have ICE raids, and it's very strong and present in that area. And so my question is, we have this project to connect the Latino community in that area and get people informed. But we are a little afraid in how to address, as a journalist, these issues. And I know you have this experience because we become with some barriers that are difficult to address. And one example is one of the activists in that area was investigated by ICE agents, and we see those cases in other places like El Paso. People has been investigated because they report immigration issues or they are activists. So I want you to tell me what is your experience and what kind of barriers do you have or experience towards your journalism experience?
Yeah, no, you're right. Actually, it's been documented that Immigration and Customs Enforcement or Department of Homeland Security is targeting immigrant rights activists and also some journalists too, in regards to allowing them to enter the country or not. They've gotten more scrutiny than before. I think one of the biggest barriers that I have right now with immigration reporting is getting people to talk to me, people who are in the country without legal status. That is what, and I think that's where the rhetoric comes in. I think under the Obama administration, people felt more comfortable and were a lot more willing to talk about their legal status. And I mean, you saw it. There was a whole movement, for instance, with young immigrant youth, where they would do sit-ins and do demonstrations, and there was this whole campaign of undocumented, unafraid, right, where they were just putting themselves out there. And I think you see less of that under this administration. And I think a lot of it is because I think at least there was this feeling in the immigrant rights movement that you could shame Obama in some way, right? Because of his rhetoric, because it was so, complimentary to immigrants and whatnot. But under this administration, it's different. They know that it's just going to feed into the frenzy. It's going to feed into Trump and his rhetoric. So I think that it's been very difficult to get to people to talk with me on the record with their full name. And that's a really touchy situation because I definitely don't want to be responsible for someone's deportation. That's not, that's not my job. So when I talk with people who are in the country without legal status or who are at risk of deportation or removals, I always let them know, and I think it's really important to let them know, I'm a journalist, I'm with the Los Angeles Times, I'm going to be writing about this, and I'd like to be able to get your story and put your name in the story, but everyone is going to see the story. Like, it's not just going to be in the newspaper, it's going to go, on the internet, and anyone can pick it up. And I just want people to be cognizant that this is a possibility, right? That, I don't know, Immigration and Customs Enforcement can look at it, and they could possibly, it's up to their discretion, go after that person. I don't know. So I'm always transparent that way, because you have to let people know what they're getting themselves into, I think. That's very important. So yes, for me, the biggest thing has been getting people to talk with me on the record, or, and also just getting any kind of information from the government in regards to numbers. But that was happening under the Obama administration too, so.
Yeah, I'm Margie Thompson in Media, Film, and Journalism Studies, and I've worked as a journalist with women's media in Central America, and I have heard the phrase there, for example, under Somoza, the dictatorship in Nicaragua, et cetera, this phrase of the terror of the knock on the door in the middle of the night. And it's a comment to say how appalling it is to hear kids and adults here being terrified about that in the U.S. What I was wondering about the role of profits. You look at the prison industry here, and the massive profits coming out, and now detention centers, to the point where, is there ever going to be a cutback on prisons and detention centers because of the profit motive and so on, and how much of the rhetoric coming out of the Trump administration and so on is feeding or fed by this drive for profits, and, profits on people as if they're animals?
Well, yeah, no, definitely. When you're thinking about groups like GEO and like private detention centers, basically, that do contracts with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, yeah, there's definitely that. We've reported it at the Times. I haven't directly, but my colleagues have. We have actually, I'm very, very thankful that we have a group of immigration journalists, and they do amazing work. So I'm part of that. So in regards to detention and profits, that's been happening. I mean, I've seen, from what I've read, there's been a ramp up under the Trump administration, but it was happening under the Obama administration as well, and an administration before that. I mean, so this has been kind of like a slow grow kind of thing, and like I said, I mean, it's just right now, Trump inherited something, this kind of deportation machinery that all he had to do was kind of try to ramp it up, right? So I think that's why it's so important to look at the past and and have some kind of perspective on that. One thing I was going to say to your question, which I forgot, was about asylum. I think there's also a huge misunderstanding in Central America of what asylum is and how many people can't really meet that threshold. I remember talking with this one woman, I was in Tijuana, and I was just trying to get her story, and I asked her, hey, so why is it that you're leaving your house? She had sold everything. And this isn't the case for everyone. There are legitimate, I think, reasons people were leaving. But this woman in particular, it kind of struck me because she said, well, I'm leaving because, I just can't make it. And with my kids, I can't feed them. And I thought that was really interesting. And I said, well, is there any violence involved? She was coming from Honduras. And, is there violence? Do you feel like you're under threat? She's like, no, not at all. She's like, it's just that, I feel, so that's why I'm going to ask for asylum, because I'm having a hard time making it. And so I was just felt so badly for her because she had just sold everything she owned to make this trip on, and not knowing really what asylum is. and that she wouldn't be able to meet that threshold under the circumstances that she was giving me. So that is something that is happening as well.
My name is Karim. I am an assistant professor of journalism and a freelance journalist here. So I found it very interesting, the disconnect that you mentioned between the data and what's the rhetoric, basically. So I'm wondering, it's a double-barreled question. So the first part of it, during the time of the Obama administration, did you find that the news focus or news reporting on immigration was less than it is here? I guess in other words, is the Trump rhetoric catalyzing more coverage of immigration? And if that is so, then what would you suggest to journalists, to the community, to journalism students, when dealing not just with immigration, but with other issues, when the rhetoric is not really inflammatory?
Yeah. I would say look at the data, right? Like I really, and that's what it comes down to. No, you're right though. I mean, right now immigration is, I've been covering immigration, I think actually for more than a decade. And when I was under the Obama administration, I was covering immigration, and I felt, I was one of, I mean, there were plenty of others, but not like it is now. I mean, everyone's on the immigration beat. And it can be a dangerous thing because, and I don't blame the reporter necessarily, but when you have like a young reporter who doesn't necessarily know the backdrop of where this is happening and don't have that perspective and that institutional knowledge, it can be hard to cover the immigration beat. Like I said, it's really complicated. It is so easy to get something wrong on an immigration story because the laws are so complicated, the policies are too. And so what I would say is, and this is what I tell other people, find an immigration attorney that you trust, that doesn't necessarily have an agenda, and run things by that attorney. Because, and not necessarily like they're gonna be in the story, but just as background. Actually, I have this great, and I always plug him because he's just wonderful. His name is Dan Kowalski. He's an immigration attorney here actually in Colorado. Great source for me. I can call him anytime and be like, hey, does this sound right to you? Is this actually what, am I saying this right? Am I writing this correctly? Because it's so easy to get something wrong. And also he can give me, I mean, he has this, he should have been here too. He has this great presentation on how, on what it takes to become a legal resident and how the laws have changed. I mean, he takes it back to the 1800s. I mean, it's great knowledge. And so he has that knowledge. So I would say if you're covering this and you're new, especially immigration, I would try to get a hold of someone who's a real expert, like an attorney, who can tell you, okay, well, this is why this is happening, or this has happened before, or there's a disconnect here, or something like that, because they probably know more than you do. I mean, so yeah, that's my advice. Yeah.
I'm Adan Medrano from Houston. Do you see a role, or what role has there been on the part of the neighborhood small Spanish language newspapers, like the weeklies? In Houston, we have a couple, Onda, and because you said compelling stories with data. And have they played a role, or is there a role for the Spanish language small neighborhood? I
think they definitely have a huge role. Yeah, and they know way more about what's going on in the community than I do. I mean, they just do. I mean, they do. They're so tapped in. I'm friends with Pilar Marrero, who was with La Opinión for a long time, and I mean, she knew things that I had no idea about that were happening on the ground before it became a national story. Yes, definitely. They know what's going on. I think there's a definite role for Spanish language media, and I wouldn't even call it ethnic media. I would just call it Spanish language media. Yes.
Thank you for your talk. That was really great. I appreciated all the different layers. So my question has to do with the media between the global north and the global south and how they frame different stories. For instance, when you talk about climate change and migration, the global north tends to frame it in terms of security issues, whereas the global south talks about it in terms of international issues and vulnerability. So I'm wondering about when you talk about families and the separation of kids, how does the global North and the South frame the issue?
Gosh, I really don't. I mean, well, I think, well, I guess I'm just wondering, what do you mean by that? Like, how do they frame the issue? Like what do you mean?
What's the discourse?
What's the discourse? I think there's a lot of miscommunication, especially like what the gentleman brought up earlier in regards to how children are kind of being used as a way to get into the United States. And I think that in these countries, what's happening on the ground is that, of course, yes, you do have unscrupulous coyotes and polleros, human smugglers who will tell people, yes, you know, this is your way, you should go now, you have to go now because now is the time to go. But I think in regards to climate change and what's happening there, I mean, you have, like, for instance, in Guatemala, you have areas that have been completely affected by climate change, where the harvest, for instance, the corn harvest, it didn't give this year. And so people have been pushed, that's definitely a factor, and people have been pushed north due to that. But right now, and the way the laws are, and especially like asylum laws, doesn't cover necessarily climate change. It doesn't at all. You know, and it's actually become a lot more tough. I mean, now, if you're, for instance, just to stray a little bit from this, if you are the victim of, like, let's say, if there's a gang that went after your family and is going after you, and you have those threats and everything, that doesn't necessarily meet the asylum threshold anymore under this administration. You have to prove that the government was complicit in that as well. So it's become a lot harder, and frankly I mean the North, I mean they don't see climate change as part of the reason why people are moving up north. And I think that, you know, you have clear cases of asylum, I think, from the people that I've spoken with on the ground, immigrants that have spoken on the ground. But you also have cases where it's like a mix of things, you know, like the woman who I spoke with, you know, she was talking about economic reasons. You have people who are leaving for economic reasons because of the violence, because the harvest didn't give this year, you know, and so it's like this kind of almost disaster for these people. And it's not necessarily that they're going to meet that asylum threshold. And that's why I'm saying that we have to have a conversation about what we consider, you know, what we consider an American, who we want to let in. Because I think that that's going to become more a conversation, especially when it comes to climate change, because it's disproportionately affecting poorer countries like Guatemala, like the Northern Triangle. And I don't know if I answered your question. I hope I did, but I tried. Okay.
Quick question. I thought your address was so interesting in terms of perception. And how's this? Okay,
Yeah.
Quick question. So I thought your address was very interesting in terms of perception and facts. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering what impact do you think DACA had on our perception of Obama's immigration policies? Or my perception,
Yeah.
I should say.
Well, I guess I would want to talk about, DACA really happened, and some people might disagree with me. Some former White House people might disagree with me, but DACA happened because of immigrant youth, because they really pushed the boundaries. I mean, it really did, because, I mean, there was a point in time where they were just fed up, and I think they still are, with Democrats and Republicans, both parties. And they didn't see anything really happening, anything moving. So they pressured the Obama administration by holding sit-ins, acts of civil disobedience, really calling out not necessarily their enemies, but their supposed allies, right? I mean, Obama was a supposed ally to the immigrant community. So if it weren't for immigrant youth, we wouldn't have DACA, frankly. He's the one, it was that group of people that really pushed Obama to pass DACA. But there's also this feeling out there that DACA was just a Band-Aid. It was just a small fix, and that people got, obviously for some immigrant youth, it was a big deal. I mean, it was huge for them to be able to have the access to work legally, to be able to travel back to their home countries and visit their families under advanced parole. But I think that there is also a feeling in the movement, in the immigrant youth movement, that it made people complacent, that it made the immigrant rights movement complacent because they got like a scrap of something and they're like, okay, I'm good now. Forget everyone else. I'm not saying everyone did that, but there was a little bit of that. And so there is this fracture, definitely different fractures within the immigrant youth movement in regards to not accepting another DACA, not wanting another kind of temporary fix because it's going to leave everyone else behind. And then there's a group, and there are definitely people, like any kind of movement that's matured, that are saying, no, we need it. We need something. It'll be the start of something. But the sad reality is that, I guess, the dreamers, I guess, or just immigrant youth, have been used as pawns for a long time to kind of be able to get some kind of immigration reform. And they know it. I mean, they know that power that they have, but it's also a vulnerability as well. So I think, to me, immigrant youth, that's a huge topic to explore. Because where we're headed now, I don't know, I mean, I really wonder what they're going to do next to push the envelope under the Trump administration. And it's a really interesting group of people because you have people who grew up with this idea of the American dream, right? As long as you work hard, you try hard, you work hard, you keep your nose clean, you'll make it. But that's not necessarily true. And I think a lot of them are coming to that reality, that they were kind of sold a bill of goods. So it's a really interesting, to me, that's a whole topic to explore.
I'm going to have to ask us to continue our conversations one-on-one, and I'm very pleased to be able to tell you that Cindy is going to be with us for the next several days during the Migrahack. So I want to invite all of you to, she's a wonderful, accessible person, so please find some time to talk with her one-on-one and to continue the conversation. What's going to happen next is that we're going to take a short break so that we can have some coffee, and that we will then be able to help to start talking about the Migrahack process. That's going to happen at 10. We'll invite Celeste Bustamante up, and Lisa Martinez is going to give us a presentation on Colorado Immigration 101. We're also going to hear from Sandra Fish about some of the data that she has been able to put together that we'll all be able to draw on. So I just wondered, for those of you who are here, if you have signed up to be part of a team, could you raise your hand? So just have a look around the room. There are a lot of us who are going to be spending some time in the next couple of days working together, meeting new people, and getting a chance to dig into these issues and to learn together, and also to present something that we can put together that will help others to understand the immigration process as well. So thank you so much for being here, and please let's thank now Cindy, and we'll be back at 10.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Being a mom and seeing my shit. Well,
let me invite you to take a seat. We're just about to start the Migrahack process. So if you could please take a seat, we're going to give you, hopefully some of you have had a chance to meet your teammates. If you haven't, don't worry, we'll make sure that you get a chance to meet them, and you'll be spending quite a bit of time with them in the next couple of hours. So thanks very much for being here again. And just to start us off, I wanted to recognize again Nancy Watsman, who is director of the Colorado Media Project and is one of the collaborators on this project and on today. And she has been doing some journalism spotting. So she wants to call out some people here who are part of our teams and who are actually some of the team leaders for today. So let me turn it over to Nancy.
Yeah, and if I miss you, maybe you could stand up and do a shout out. But yeah, no, we're so happy to have Colorado Public Radio, Denverite, including one of the people we acknowledged in the slides, Kevin Beatty over there. And Colorado Sun, Beatrice, who asked a wonderful question from Durango earlier, and Mike. And what town are you from again? Alamosa. Mike Clifford, thank you. And I'm not always good with the names, sorry. And Eric Lubers from Colorado Sun. If anybody else is here, is Laura Frank here? Rocky Mountain PBS in the house. So that's just a few. I think more are coming, but don't be shy and make sure we'll connect you all up. Who's here? KGNU.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Also, Natalia Navarro from Colorado Public Radio, a former student of mine.
Okay, so and this is an opportunity for us all to get to know one another. So we wanted to highlight the journalists because we know that they have done a lot of stories on immigration in the past and will be working throughout the day. And one of the things that makes this different as a Migrahack as opposed to a hackathon is that we're all working as part of a collective impact. We're trying to work to make change together and bring people together from various parts of and backgrounds and lives to inform ourselves so that we can also help others to participate in a larger conversation about immigration. So now to tell us more about what we're going to be doing for the next couple of days, it's my pleasure to introduce you to my friend Celeste Bustamante, who is a professor at the University of Arizona and this is actually her third Migrahack that she's been a part of. She was a part of one in Mexico City. She organized one in Arizona and has been our consultant and has helped to plan this Colorado Migrahack as well. And before I have passed the mic to her, I also was reminded from my colleague David Capini that those of you who have packets will have a survey in your packet that helps us to understand a little bit about your own background in immigration. And so we're trying to do some survey collection just to find out about who's in the room and what kinds of beliefs and understandings you have now. And you'll also receive a survey probably a couple months later, but you also can take one immediately after the event if you'd like to tell us a little bit about how this event may have helped you or given you some new insights. So please do fill out the survey that's in your packet. And again, now I want to make sure that we have an opportunity to welcome, and we're so pleased to have here Celeste Bustamante.
Yes. I think it's working, yes. Can everybody hear me back there? Yes? Thank you so much, Lynn, for that introduction and for actually allowing me to be part of this wonderful process, which is the Migrahack, which I'll talk about in a moment. But it's really exciting to see this many people here. I know that the goal was something like 100 people and more than twice that number signed up, so that's really amazing to see. And as Lynn said, I've been involved in Migrahacks for the last close to 5 years now. So what I'm going to do today is sort of, after I tell you like my connection to the Migrahacks and how I got involved, explain how this process worked. My experience with migration actually goes back 30 plus years. When I was an undergrad at San Jose State University, and I was starting to be a television journalist, and I was listening to the radio, watching these stories about immigrants who were trapped in railway boxcars and suffocating in these boxcars as they were trying to make their way into the United States. This was, again, 30 years ago, and so I bring this up because at that point I thought, well, how could this be happening?
How could people want to be, the process be so derailed so that people are having to die? We need to do something about it. And it was one of these, that prompted it sort of inspired me to go work in the U.S.-Mexico border as a journalist first, and then to study the issue as a media historian. And here we are, 30 years later, where the organization Humane Borders has tracked this data of the number of people who have died just in the Arizona desert, and that number, they say, between 2000 and 2018, more than 3,339 people have perished in the desert. So again, how is it that we're here, still unable to improve this situation? And I think we can do this through events like the Migrahack. That's why really I'm here, to shed really light on this issue and not heat as it is generally done. And just to throw out a few figures here, the UN has been tracking migration, and this is a global issue. They report in 2017 that 258 million people were migrating internationally. That's about 3.3% of the global population. It's interesting to note also that the UN also reports that 740 million people are migrating internally. So there are many more people that are migrating internally than in their own countries and their own regions than internationally. So I think what an event like the Migrahack can do is help us to through the data, put things into perspective, as well as add human voices and understanding to what we're talking about. So this was me back in 2015. I don't know, do I look that much different? When we had our Arizona Migrahack, brought together community activists and journalists and students, and doing similar things that you're going to be doing over the next 2 days. What is the purpose of a Migrahack? It is to really bring these diverse groups of people together, to hack open data on immigration in order to tell stories differently, to improve understanding and change the conversation about immigration. And an important piece of the Migrahack is certainly we're telling stories that are data-driven, but it's also about visualization and data visualization. And visualization, we've been talking a lot for journalists who work in the field, they know. The visualization is becoming increasingly important. And no longer just complements a story, but in some cases, it is the story. So how are you going to effectively, through data visualizations, tell the story? And that's what you're going to be doing here over the next couple of days. So I was involved in setting up the Arizona Migrahack. This is the award-winning project and the award-winning team that came up with this project called No Timely Response. And we had Mariana Dale going left to right, Mariana Dale, Fernanda Echavarri, and two people who were helping to guide Perla Treviso. And all of these journalists, they were local journalists at the time. They're now, Fernanda is now working at Latino USA, and Perla Treviso is at the Houston Chronicle, and Mariana Dale, I believe, is at the Republic. So if I can go to I just wanted to show you quickly, if I could. Here's what the team, No Timely Response ended up doing. I'm not going to go through the whole project, but again, here's what the technology is changing so quickly that we were talking about this, that there's so much more that you can do now. So I'm really interested to see what kinds of projects and outcomes you have over the next few days. But what this team did was look at the data from the DPS when they were enforcing what many of you know as the Show Me Your Papers law. So when they would stop people, the questions were, when would they ask for their immigration status? And then if they did ask for their immigration status, when would they maybe search the vehicle? So they created a little game, and you kind of there is audio there too. And so you go through the process. Do you suspect that the driver is in the country illegally? Do you check their immigration status? Yes. And then, so these are the responses. Let me just cut to the quick here. They found in the data, when they were looking at the Excel sheet of all of the stops, they kept seeing this NTPR on all of these reports. And they thought, what is this NTPR? Well, they found out that NTPR was no timely response. And that was that the Border Patrol was not responding in a timely fashion, so this held up the whole process, and that's how the title of this project came about. The cool thing, I think, I won't go into the whole project, you can look it up, is you'll find that these lasting impacts will happen, and that's what we're hoping, that networks will be formed. So that team that I just showed you, Perla Treviso and Fernanda Chavarri, who were working for different media organizations at the time, ended up teaming up together afterwards to create a very multimedia a series of stories called Divided by Law, in which they were looking at mixed status families and one particular family in the Tucson, Nogales area. And they were able to publish it in the Tucson paper, the Arizona Daily Star, and Arizona Public Media. So that's sort of what the Migrahack is about too, is encouraging networks to be formed that can be long-lasting and that collaborative projects could result even after the Migrahack is over. And really, the possibilities are endless. Let me see if I can go to another site that I think is really shows you the potential of the technology that exists today and what can be done. So I found this migration data portal. They have lots of data that are, I'm assuming that some of this data is open data. And for example, here we go with the, we talk a lot about the difference between perceptions and what the data really show. So I know this is a little bit small for some of you to see, but what we're talking about, they did a large survey. What percentage of the population do you think are immigrants, that is, not born in this country? And if we look at the United States here, the respondents generally thought about 33% of the people in the country were not born here, but in actuality, the number is 14%. So this is, again, partly the media are responsible for, because of the types of immigration stories that are reported and perhaps lack of context, that people aren't really familiar with the actual numbers. So that's what the Migrahack is about, is trying to get people to understand really what the situation is, right? So you can go to this, maybe we could even put it up, this link on the Migrahack Colorado Migrahack website. So there's another, these are all really interesting, but showing where people are going, how they're, and not just, this is not just a US-Mexico issue, obviously. This is a very good resource. But of course, your projects will focus on Colorado, right? That's what you're being encouraged to do, is look at, okay, there are these different mapping technologies and different software out there, but what's happening in Colorado, right? Because that's where I think the local journalists can really be helpful in improving understanding, because a national media outlet is probably not going to do that kind of reporting, but it's still very important for Coloradans to understand what's going on. So just some things to keep in mind. Alberto Cairo is at the University of Miami, and he's an expert in data visualization. And I really like his approach, these tenets that he has put out there for data visualization. And we want the maps to look cool, obviously, so that people will want to look at them, but they have to be accurate. We don't want to create a map that distorts. That's going against what we're here, why we're here, right? So they should be truthful, they should be functional, beautiful, so attractive to look at, insightful, so you're pulling really good insights from the data and telling a story through that, and enlightening, so helping people understand maybe an issue or part of the issue in a way that they haven't previously. So this is all on the website, so I encourage you to go to the Colorado Migrahack website. But just in a nutshell, here's what we'll be doing over the next couple of days. Once we split up here, some people will be going to the FOIA workshop. Other people will be staying here and working on their projects. And then we'll have lunch at 12:30. And then you'll be able to work on your projects from 12:30 to 4. And then from 4 to 6 will be a really interesting place for you to be to get different perspectives on what's happening locally with migration, with community perspectives and experts on a migration. So if you're looking for some expert opinions, some real lived experience from people who have had that migration experience, you'll really want to come to that 4 o'clock session, roundtable. And then if you want to stay all here until 9:45 tonight, you can do that and continue to this room will be available for you to work on your projects. And then tomorrow, the gates will open up early in the morning, and there'll be some light breakfast available. We want to make you, you'll need fuel to continue with working on your projects. And then we'll have a breakout session from 10 to 12, and then a lunch again. And then the big thing is you want to finalize your projects really by 4:30 so that they can be ready to go by 5 o'clock, when we'll have the closing ceremony. And you'll be able to there'll be a poster session and a big treat with chef and historian Adan Medrano. He's here. Got to speak with him a little bit this morning. I think that's going to be an amazing event that you'll want to be here for. And just to get everybody on the same page, here's the actual website. Oops, no, not really. It is on my page here. We're not on the same page, obviously. Let's see, I think I have to do this. Yes. All right, so if you go to the Colorado Migrahack website, there's all the information that I just went over is here. And also important to think about is the code of conduct. So this is a space for dialogue, for open discussions, new ideas, but it's a harassment-free environment as well. So we, as Cindy Carcamo mentioned, we all have these very emotional ties to this issue and have very emotional maybe opinions about this issue of immigration and migration. But And that's okay, but we want to be respectful at all times to other people's viewpoints. And so please go to the website and take a look at these tips for the code of conduct, please. Be considerate in speech and your actions. You want to, I think that this crowd is not going to have any problems with this, but it's just a good reminder, right? So take a look at that, please. Let me see. Let's see. And finally, I just wanted to go over a few, having gone through this process before a few times, it can be a little bit chaotic. It can be a little bit discomforting because you're not sure, you're working with new people, you're not sure what the technology is, so that sometimes makes me feel uncomfortable. When you're learning new technologies, so kind of try to be open as possible to the process and knowing that you're not going to feel totally grounded at all times, perhaps. But when you meet with your teams, if you haven't done so yet, one of the first things you'll want to do is decide, based on everybody's experience and interests, what the focus of your project is going to be. There's a general question that the Migrahack is focusing on, and that is, what are the lived experiences of people in Colorado in terms of migration and the current migration policies? But you'll want to hone your project. That's very broad, obviously, so you'll want to decide on the focus of your project early on. Make sure that focus is clearly stated, that everybody understands that, so you're all working together for the same toward the same goal, and that your plan is feasible. So you don't want to do, although it's a worthy project, to do a 20-minute documentary on lived experiences in Colorado on migration, because that's too broad and it's not going to be done in 36 hours, right? And then you want to divide up the work so that people with different skills end up applying those skills, and everybody participates in the process. If you don't know something, and if you need help with something, there are going to be lots of experts walking around, people who will be floating around, experts on migration, experts on storytelling, and experts on data. So please ask for help. Earlier, the better, probably, for your project. Check in with your team members. Make sure that, as you're going along, that you're still all kind of marching and moving toward the same goal, and that you're not getting sort of divided with what you think you should be doing. And then also be flexible. You might think that you want to do X, but then it turns out a little bit later in the day that your project needs to be scaled down just a bit, given the time frames. And follow the guidelines for when you should be accomplishing what. That will be helpful for you, so you don't fall too far behind and you're rushing too much at the end. And of course, you should be having fun in all of this. Okay, I think that's all I have for you right now. And thank you so much for being part of this. I'm really, really thrilled to be here and excited to see what you're going to come up with in the next day or so. Yeah. And now, turning things over to Professor Lisa Martinez.
Okay, is this working? Okay. Sorry, I don't use mics in my everyday life, so it's always a new experience. I'm Lisa Martinez. I'm a professor of sociology in the Department of Sociology and Criminology here at DU, and one of the members of the organizing committee bringing this event to you today. So it's wonderful to see such great turnout. We have community, we have faculty, we have staff, we have students. So it really is a sort of large event in many ways that brings together really different communities to focus on this issue of migration. Much of my research, as Lynn mentioned this morning, is on migration. I focus primarily on undocumented youth, or as Cindy Carcamo mentioned this morning, the so-called dreamers. And there are many other amazing immigration scholars in this room as well who are here to share their expertise and who many of you will have opportunities to engage with today. There was also a comment or question during the Q&A with Cindy about, where are the facts, where are the data? And I'm here to say that there's a ton of data, and actually that's what you all will be involved with for much of this weekend. And then, of course, later this afternoon, our community panelists will be speaking to different aspects of immigration, whether it's the law, whether it's in terms of folks who are working with immigrant communities, and then also people who have connections with regard to sort of the politics and policy side of the issue. So please join us for that, as there will be more experts who can share their insights. I want to be brief in my comments because I know everyone is raring to go and wants to get started. But Lynn had asked if I would do a bit of an immigration 101, knowing that there are many people in the room who maybe don't have any expertise in immigration. And we wanted to sort of focus in on what's happening here in Colorado. So I'm going to give a very brief sort of overview of what's happening, and then I'm going to release everyone to go to their respective locations depending on where they're going to be after this. So one of the things that I often confront in my work, and many of the other migration scholars often confront in their work too, is this question of, well, does Colorado really have an immigrant population? Is there anything that's really going on? Oftentimes in our research, we have to sort of justify the Colorado case because the assumption is that most of what's happening with regard to immigration is happening along the US-Mexico border or happening in states that are known to have sizable immigrant populations. And the answer to that question is yes, actually, there's a lot of things that are happening around migration here in our state. And in many ways, Colorado has been a barometer of national trends. So these data and these points that are shown here are just to give you kind of a sense of how things have shifted, even just in the last maybe 15 years or so. Starting with a very important point in our history, which is 2006, and the passage of SB 90, which was a Show Me Your Papers law. It was actually one of the first in the country, which served as a model for what we saw in Arizona in SB 1070, and other states following suit in Alabama and Georgia, for example. And essentially what SB 90 did is it allowed law enforcement to stop a person suspected of being in the country without documents. For purposes, for example, a broken tail light could get a person stopped. Law enforcement could then ask for identification. If they felt the person was in the country without documentation, then they could continue to ask a series of questions. Now, this is where, in many respects, we start to see sort of the racial element that Cindy was talking about earlier, where it was this notion of suspected to be in the country without documents and what that means, and the racialization, of course, of immigrants that came into play. As a result of SB 90, in the 7 years that it was in effect, there were thousands of people who essentially were stopped for traffic violations, misdemeanors in most cases, ended up in city or county jail, and then through this process of enforcement, which was amplified with secure communities, essentially meant that people could then be handed over to Immigration and Customs Enforcement, known as ICE, and in many cases, those people could then be deported. Okay? So being stopped for a broken taillight to deportation. Okay? So SB 90 was really sort of the turning point in many respects in facilitating this enhanced enforcement that we saw during the Bush administration, continued in the Obama administration, and that we're seeing ramped up as well in the current administration. Other things to sort of keep in mind is that as politics has kind of shifted, so has immigration policy to a certain extent. In 2012, when Obama signed the executive order Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, also known as DACA, that meant that young people who met certain requirements, and if you've ever looked, it's a very long list of requirements, had the opportunity to access higher education and also employment. These were the so-called documented youth, or the dreamers, who were very involved in politics, in activism, to really sort of bring attention to the issues that they were experiencing, but also, of course, their family members. A year later, Colorado sort of complemented what was happening at the federal level with passage of the ACID bill, which essentially provided youth the opportunity to attend public universities in state tuition, whereas before many of them would pay international tuition rates, which were quite exorbitant for many of them. 2013 was also a turning point in that SB 90 was repealed, largely as a result of efforts between the immigrant rights organizing community, some members of law enforcement who felt that as a result of SB 90, people were less inclined to report crimes because they feared that it would expose them to the possibility of deportation. And there was also a measure for driver's licenses for migrants as well, whereas before they weren't able to receive driver's licenses. We also start to see a shift start to happen, right? So as SB 90 is repealed, we see in-state tuition. In 2014, all counties in Colorado stopped honoring civil detainers. And also, we see the priority enforcement program, which again, much of what has been happening here has served as a model for what other states are doing. Of course, after 2016, when President Trump ran on a platform primarily focusing on immigration enforcement, we've seen that since 2017, and almost immediately from the moment that he took office, that enhanced enforcement was going to be part of the policy platform. So we see as early as 2017, escalation in interior deportations, the reactivation of secure communities, and this movement towards no prioritization. What this means is that, for example, the youth who were somewhat protected under DACA were also subject to deportation, right? So DACA was no longer going to be a protection for those youth, and they also would be subjected to deportation. There would be no prioritization. So where this sort of brings us now, and this is something that I hope you'll sort of keep in mind as you start thinking about your projects for this weekend, is kind of where we are now in much of what's happening and what's trending. And if you look at this table here, what the data suggests is that by the end of this year, deportations will have increased. They're projecting about 550% from 2016. Okay, so this is quite a dramatic uptick in deportations. Now, in this table that you can see that there's definitely an uptick during the Obama administration, but given the projections and what we're seeing, the expectation is that we'll likely surpass that number. So all of this is to give you a little bit of context as to what's been happening in the last sort of 12, 13 years to help situate some of the realities of what's happening with regard to migration here in Colorado. So these data are actually part of the data sets that are available to you. There's more information that looks at whether it's deportations or how much has been spent. You can search by county. You can also, I think, search by city. Rebecca Galumba, yes. I see my colleague Jesse Acevedo shaking his head, yes. So there's different ways that you can look at similar data, and you'll have access to that if, in fact, that's something that you want to focus on as well. Okay. So a little bit of background. I realize that's a very quick history. Obviously, there's a lot more that sort of precedes it, but 2006, as I said, was sort of a pivotal moment with regard to immigration policy and some of the shifts that are happening and what's happening today. Now, it's my pleasure to sort of, I guess, kick off the reason why we're here today, and we're going to describe this as sort of organized chaos, is how it's going to kind of go. So those of you who signed up for the FOIA workshop, the Freedom of Information Act workshop, I'm going to release you all to go to room 301 where that workshop is going to be held. So if you exit these doors and basically just go to the right, there's a staircase. When you get to the top of the staircase, you'll want to turn right again, and there's a large sort of classroom with windows. That's where you'll want to be for that workshop. If you need an elevator or have accessibility issues, there is an elevator towards the front of the library door. So right as you enter, there's an elevator there so that if you need that, you can access that as well. If you're not working with the GitHub data, then I'm going to release you all to also go outside where we're going to start organizing you into teams, okay? If you're not sure whether or not you're part of the group that's using the GitHub data, you can also go outside and we'll make sure you get to the right place. Everybody else, those of you who are using the GitHub data, will stay in this room and we'll get started with Sandra Fisk in just a little while. Okay, so just to repeat, if you're going to the FOIA workshop, that's upstairs in 301. If you're not using the GitHub data, if you'll just kind of hang out in the front here, we'll make sure that you find your team, and then everybody else will stay in this room. So I hope everyone has a great couple of days, and I'm really excited, as is everybody on the planning team, to see what projects you all come up with. And also, if you have any questions, as Celeste said, you're confused, you're not sure where to go, that's okay. Please ask one of us. There are several of us in the room who will help you find your place, okay? All right, thank you all.
really help. You know, I've assembled a collection of data and even some other resources here on this GitHub site, which we'll post a bigger link to at some point. If you haven't seen it, you should probably take a look. You can use this data as you please based on, you know, if we could have, like, it's kind of distracting to have the conversation, sorry. You can use this data as you please based on questions you're trying to answer today. It's possible that more than one group will use the same data set in different ways. A group might use more than one data set. It's going to be really exciting tomorrow afternoon to see what people have come up with. And that's the really cool thing that's going on here. You know, I want to note that you should acknowledge the source in your work. I've got a note down here about this on the front of the page. We have data that the Associated Press has put together, that the Marshall Project put together and released earlier this week, and there are other journalism or nonprofit organizations that should be acknowledged. And you should acknowledge the government sources like the census or whatever it is there. Also, you know, I'm a data journalist. I specialize mostly in politics, but I've learned a lot about immigration data. Remember that data is nothing without the people and the experts behind it. When I teach journalism students at the University of Colorado, I recommend they talk with the official sources, those who help produce the data, those who work with the data, expert sources like academics or researchers who study the data and do reports based on it, but really most importantly are real people. You know, these are the people who are living these experiences, and they should not be left out. So I want to walk through some of the resources here really quickly, I hope. We've got some data on climate. This came from the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center. This is international data. And I've got some other resources on this page too. Each of these pages has more information about where the data came from and what it is. I've got a few different things on underemployment. I've got information from E-Verify nationally, the system where workers are supposed to, you know, it lists which employers are using E-Verify and some other information. Read Sludge, which is the news outlet, has been looking at federal contract data. And I've got all of their data here pulled from their Google Doc that's linked to on the front page, and ICE contracts with Colorado companies. And then I have pulled out various types of visas. Permanent visas. We'll just show you what some of these, this is a pretty big file. But it has information about companies, and you'll have to download this or cut and paste it. But I've got information on that. H-2B visas, H-2A, H-1B that are, H-2A are agriculture, H-2B are temporary workers, H-1B are the more professional workers, like you think about the tech industry. So there's some really good employment data there. I've got some information on enforcement. Basically, what I have here are from other sources. Like, I've got some information. The Colorado Independent actually did a story about this recently about solitary confinement at the Aurora Detention Center. And they did a whole data set from the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists looking at solitary confinement of detainees. The Marshall Project with The Guardian earlier this week did a really great presentation called Detained, looked at a history of detention of immigrants, and they've got a list of locations where law enforcement has cooperated. And I've got pulled out the Colorado list. You know, let me mention that the date here is in what I would consider European form. It's day, month, and year. a lot of these places in Colorado haven't detained anyone for a while. You'll want to look at the documentation from the Marshall Project there. And I think Lisa showed a slide from TRAC. And trying to open this on a different screen. So TRAC is a Syracuse university place that's that has a lot of great data, and I'm not going to call it up because it's taking too long to respond. You can't download that data. You have to, and it's got all the really good, there it is, some really good enforcement data, but you're going to have to look around. They've got immigration, prosecutions, convictions. They've got their own reports out. So if you're really into looking at enforcement, you'll want to go there and really look at their documentation. And I've looked at this a lot. You might want to give me a holler at some point. I've got some higher ed data on international enrollment at several colleges and universities, including DU, Colorado College, the CU, all the groups in the CU system, and CSU Pueblo. I've got a bunch of other resources, some studies from 2014, I think it is, by Rutgers University researchers, but I've got some really recent studies on delays in naturalization. I've got a report from the Office of Refugee Resettlement, a document from the Colorado Immigrants' Rights Coalition. That's a one-pager, and I think there are people from there. I've got a report, a slideshow that was given earlier this week by somebody at Department of Local Affairs with the Demographer's Office that gives you some overview about Colorado demographics, and which brings us to census numbers. I've got quite a few different census numbers. I've got some statistics on historic, going back to about, I don't know, 1860, 1870 in Colorado, whether people were native or foreign born. That could be useful for you. I've got more recent statistics from 2010, 2015, and 2017. I think this is actually, I need to change that. This is a recent one, data released about foreign-born and native-born population by county, although it's just the larger counties. That was released yesterday. So we've got some population things there. I've got some information on youth, both here and in a separate folder. I've got some information on, these are just really some pretty specific information about lawful permanent residents. It's important to think about who you're talking about when you talk about migration, let me add. You could be talking about refugees, which is a very different thing than lawful permanent residents, which are typically green card holders, which are different than people with different visas. So you want to look at these things. There's some interesting stuff in there if you want to get into it. And we have some good, like, localized data there. Let's see here. We have some really great info on refugees from the Associated Press that they've put together. And like annual refugee data, data on cities and refugees and foreign-born population, and then I've also added the national stats in there. So that's some really great info on refugees. In the youth folder, I have census numbers on age and education from 2010, 2017, and then age in a broader way for 2018. And then the Washington Post did this really interesting story out of Worthington, Minnesota earlier this week about unaccompanied minors. And it sent me out to get that information from a federal agency that I've cited there. So we've got this information by county, nationally, and then by Colorado counties here. There's only a few Colorado counties that are specified because they don't release the data if it would reveal who people are. So it's only the large counties. But we also have some info by state. I think there's a separate file on Colorado info. So that is pretty much the information that is available to you. If you have other sources that you would like help, like there's census data that I did not clean up on things like native-born versus foreign-born employment, marital status, housing, for larger counties especially. You know, if there's a slice of this or other data you'd like me to help finding, I'll be here all weekend. So feel free to track me down. I'm at Fishnet, N-E-T-T-E, on Twitter if you need help, and I'll just be hanging around here all weekend. So there you have it. Let me know if you have questions. Does anybody have any questions? You know, I would just get into your groups and start hacking away. I'm going to try and find that slide with, let's see here, with Celeste's great tips. Here it is.
Wouldn't it make sense to actually announce where the groups are rather than sort of just...
Yeah, we can do that. So at this point, a lot of people who set up into groups have already left. So if you have a group, if you have a sign, let's say the people with signs, stand around the room. If you see your names on a sign, that's okay. You can go there. If you didn't receive an email about being on a team, if you don't see your name on a sign, if you're the only one who's on the sign and there's nobody else around, we have a bunch of teams that are still accepting members. So we can kind of assort you from there. Yes, somebody's going to make an announcement about gear.
Hey everybody, could I get your attention for a quick second? Can you hear me okay? Hey, I'm Joe Brown. I teach here in Media, Film, and Journalism Studies. I just want to let you all know that we do have some equipment available, cameras, audio recorders. You're not required to use them, but if you are interested in developing a project that utilizes that equipment, come see me or my friend Ethan, who's sitting behind the post in the blue shirt. So that is available to you if you need it.
Hi, I'm Christoph DeMont Heinrich, and I'm a faculty member here at DU, and I am on the team. I'm the team leader for climate change. I don't see that on the wall anymore, so you guys are back there. Okay. So I guess we're going to meet, if you're on the climate, one, I don't know if there's more than one, but if you're on mine, Christoph DeMont Heinrich, we'll meet back here, it looks like, initially, and then we can figure out what we're going to do.
If anybody has not been assigned a team, come up here to the front. We've got some people who are looking for new team members. And if you are in charge of a team that needs more members, tell me.